Welcome to Stop Now. I'm Nate, and we've got a great episode for you all today. JK, how are you this week?
Hi, Nate. I'm good. Thank you. And we have been joined by Shiva as well. We have our special guest, honorable guest, Celia Williamson, and she has also joined. Let's welcome her.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week, Dr. Williamson. It is a pleasure to be able to speak with you. Can you let our audience know a little bit about the work that you do, particularly when it pertains to human trafficking?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in this work for over 26 years. And I started out just spending 6 months on the street myself, learning about women in prostitution, dope houses, drug dealers, traffickers, and then built the first direct service program for survivors in Ohio. And today I run the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. I'm a researcher and community organizer.
And I guess before we get deeper into this, there's a question that I've always had, and maybe some of our viewers have had, Dr. Williamson, when it comes to, some of the guests that we've had talk about this issue, the modern day slavery. And we've done a bunch of shows on this particular topic. And I would say at least 4 or 5 of our guests have been from Ohio. And as somebody just kind of on the outside looking in, that doesn't seem to be the place where you would assume this would happen. I know a lot of people think maybe Florida or Texas or California, maybe New York, but what is it about Ohio that makes this a prevalent issue there?
Well, we are OGs in Ohio, meaning that we care about all of our children, and even those that may be stigmatized or marginalized, and we speak out. And so trafficking happens and is just as big in LA, in Minnesota, in Maine, in Florida, in Texas, in Wyoming. But the issue about Ohio is we have a family secret, and we're not going to keep that family secret because it's on the backs of children that deserve more. So we do a lot of research. We do a lot of activism, and we do a lot of speaking out, and our legislature, our people in power listen. And we have a great way of making people who don't want to listen.
Well, how important is that, like to not only have activists and people that care about these issues like yourself, but also the legal system and the legislature that are concerned about this?
Critical, because it depends on the organizing model you use. Sometimes when you're not at the table, you have to use activism. And that's why Black Lives Matter. You have to march, you have to picket, you have to protest, you have to gain the ears of the people with power and influence that can open the doors. When you have people that are willing to listen, you don't have to picket protest. You get right to the table and go to work. Now, politicians don't like to pass or do things that are risky. They like to stay middle of the road. So it is the people that have to put great pressure to bear on people in power to do the things that they need. They don't just do them, even though we read about, Lincoln Free and all the people who did great things. It was not those people. It was the people outside of those buildings putting great pressure to bear on those people. And we love to do that. We have, fortunately, people who like to run with us, and they're as passionate as we are. And those people that don't want to run to us or with us, we have great ways of saying, we put you in office and we can certainly put you out of office. So however you would like to do this, we can do it that way.
I have a question, Ms. Celia. So you are in a university professor, right? I mean,
yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. On the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute, why is that important for you? Like, what made you to choose that advocacy? And you have been doing research on this, so.
Yeah. Well, first of all, where I am today allows me to speak out. And that's why I think universities are the places that could step up in the strongest way with the strongest voice, because professors there, once you earn tenure, that allows you to say scary things to people in power without the threat. I mean, that's how we advance civilization. That's how we advance knowledge, is when you take away the threat of someone's voice, they can truly speak for the people. I started in 1993 because I was a social worker in a high crime area in the north end of Toledo, and I would drive in to work with kids and families. And I would see women standing out there, and I would sweep up condoms. And my first inclination was to stigmatize, to go along with society and stigmatize women, to say, I want you to get out of here. I'm trying to work with families and kids, and you're bringing drugs and crime and all the things, and you need to disappear, disintegrate, or whatever. And I was not woke. I was not enlightened. And so then, one day I had an epiphany, and I thought, well, I'm supposed to be implementing these Christian values. I'm supposed to be implementing these social work values. So we work with the poor, vulnerable, and oppressed. And I'm working with the worthy, the beautiful, and the deserving, kind of patting myself on the back, thinking I'm doing a good job, while I'm stigmatizing and denigrating somebody who is indeed vulnerable, poor, and oppressed. So I decided to focus, at least for the next 6 months, I thought. It turned out to be 26 years, but that's the power of story. But I decided to focus and go on the street, because I went to the library and I tried to study as a person who's a scholarly person does. And they didn't really have anything in the library that was meaningful, that treated women with humanity. And so I had to go out and be a student of the street and find out, why are you here? What's happening? What's your experience? And then working with the women to develop a program that would best serve them.
I know every story is different, but is there a commonality? Is there a common kind of unifying theme for, these victims of human trafficking?
Absolutely. And what I'm talking about is sex trafficking, but human trafficking covers labor trafficking, a lot of times of foreign victims that are brought into the U.S., but some citizens as well. And then sex trafficking, mostly in the U.S., it is U.S. citizens, teens, boys and girls, and women. And one of the unifying things that sort of threads across all victims is vulnerability. And so it's not the idea of somebody walking outside and somebody snatching them into a white van. I mean, if I hear that again, I'm so tired of that narrative, because that is not how sex trafficking commonly works. Like it does happen, but it's very rare. But what happens in sex trafficking is the same thing that's been happening since the beginning of the time. Pimping is sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is pimping. If you know the story of how pimps work, then you know sex trafficking. It's about manipulation. It's about positioning. And once I'm not snatching you and chaining your wrists and your ankles. That's ridiculous. I'm chaining your heart and your mind. See, because if we had victims that were actively trying to get away, it would be a whole different story. But our victims aren't actively trying to get away. Most times they have been trauma bonded, they have been manipulated and bonded to their traffickers. So it is a whole series of helping people to gain their own freedom back. It's much more complex. It's much more difficult. And when we keep saying that people are snatched and grabbed and anybody can be trafficked, that's really not explaining the whole scenario. We are very clear in the literature on who is being trafficked and who's at high risk. And it is kids who live in poverty, who are foreign born, kids who are people of color, who represent the DD population, those type of kids who have been involved in child protection and juvenile court and they ran away. Those are the kids most at risk. And so when we go out and say anybody can be trafficked, then influential, powerful people hear that, and they have money, resources, and time, and they run to protect their communities,
Right.
which are at low risk, away from kids who are at high risk. And that is the definition of institutionalized privilege. So we have to stop saying anybody. If we say it, we have to qualify it by who's actually at risk and who's being trafficked the most.
If somebody's watching and they know somebody in that situation, you talk about, it's not that physical bondage. A lot of times it's the mind, it's the heart, it's that emotional connection. How can you help somebody who's in that situation, I guess, without putting them in further danger?
Yeah. First of all, we always tell people to call. We have a national hotline, and it's 888-373-7888. And that is a national hotline. We have task forces, federal and state level task forces all across the country. As soon as you call in information, and you can call in anonymously and describe whatever, you don't have to know names. You can describe clothing, places, activity. And once you hang up, then that operator is going to connect to the task force in your region. So that's the first thing. You should not be trying to rescue people yourself, because that is dangerous, because you are messing with these people's money. And when if somebody messes with your money, you are not to play with. So I would not try to do that. But if you have an opportunity, because you know these folks, and you can have conversations with youth who are vulnerable, or with women you think are caught up in this, have those conversations and start talking about, realities. How come you're 15 and he's 27? Like, how's that work? Why do you think he would want to be with you? Always asking you to sell yourself for both of you to benefit. Is that really what somebody does who says they love you? And start putting some doubt. Of course, if that person is underage, then it is child abuse. We have passed many laws to say that it is child abuse. And sometimes it can confuse you, because you think of child abuse victim as somebody sort of huddled in the corner. And this person is wearing heels and breasts hanging out and all these things. And you're like, oh, no, that's not a track view. That's a fast little girl. No, that is a little girl with a rough exterior, but inside that's a child. So that is a victim of abuse. And you should be calling child protection, and you can do that anonymously. But yeah, and then there are kids at risk, and there are signs of kids who are at high risk, who aren't trafficked, but they're heading toward the fire.
So then it points out, like, from my understanding, what you're saying, it's volunteer involvement, like whether it's a child or adult, they just brainwashed and they do that as a job, right? So
Yes.
To make money, to get comfort in life, and they believe the perpetrators. So how do we expect justice in this? Like, do perpetrator ever gets punished?
Yes. So in 2000, our U.S. federal government passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And that was based on the United Nations protocol, where the world really acknowledged that this modern day slavery was going on. The US passed the federal law in 2000 to acknowledge that we do have modern day slaves on US soil. It is not the movie Taken. It is not, Liam Neeson is not coming to save the day. He does not know all. Theirs are not largely middle class.
So wait a minute, doctor. You telling me he doesn't have a particular set of skills that are useful in this situation?
I watched the movie and I was like, wow, is he Superman? Like, how does he know all this? And then he just goes to other countries, like, breaks all kinds of laws and doesn't go to jail, and then rescue. So just dislodge that, from your brain. But so we passed a federal law, and then the states came behind that and passed state laws. so that we could prosecute federally, we could prosecute using state, but we could also provide resources to survivors to help them recover. So we passed safe harbor laws, and that really meant that teenagers that are being trafficked are no longer called prostitutes or child prostitutes. They're now called victims of commercial sexual exploitation. And the people that are involved, the adults, whether they're customers or traffickers, will be prosecuted with felony charges because we have now begun to take this seriously and not blaming the victim like we used to.
How important is the language around this? Because a week ago, or a couple weeks ago, I guess, we had a speech expert who was talking about the power of words, and just, you know, what you're saying right there, like, these aren't prostitutes, these are children and victims. How important is the way that we talk about this issue?
Very important. And we had a situation here in my community where a 14-year-old allegedly was involved with a vice cop. And we had our local newspaper describing the trial. And they would describe the officer as decorated and saving lives and all the things. And they would describe the 14-year-old using particular language. So they would say, the 14-year-old allegedly had sex with the vice officer. And I said, no, child molestation. Because when you're 14, you don't have sex, you are molested. The young lady, nope, child. And so it's very important that that's why we use the term child sexual exploitation, because we want you to remember it's a child. We want you to remember it's exploitation. When we say commercial sexual exploitation, we want you to remember that there's money being handed to pay for another human being, which is what we call slavery. So we use language very purposefully. We don't even like to refer to people as Johns, because John is a past. And this is not a John. Somebody who pays for sex with a child is a sexual predator. A child molester is not a John. So we try to change the paradigm so that people understand, you know, whose side we're on. We're on the side of children, you know, and so it just reminds you of that. And so that's why we don't say the word pimp anymore. We say trafficker, because pimp is really a term that's been taken over by pop culture, and pimp doesn't hold the mystique that it once did. You know, pimp now means cool. Pimp means, you know,
it's not dangerous.
Right, it's not dangerous, but trafficker is dangerous. That reminds you that, oh yes, this person is destroying the trajectory of someone's life, the emotional health of someone's life. But trafficking doesn't mean movement. Somebody can live in a neighborhood, be trafficked in that neighborhood, and never be taken across state lines. So, but language is critical to where we stand. We have to tell children, we stand with you. And so it sort of destigmatizes that child, and it recognizes those women, those men, those boys and girls. It recognizes their experience.
I think while you were saying that, it just kind of clicked in my mind. And I don't know how we extricate the language from just the way society is, because like you can see on the news, like little black kids get in trouble and they're a young man or a young woman, like you said, little brown kids, like they're a mature teenager, which I don't know how you have a mature teenager, but you know, you got a 20, 30-year-old white guy that does something. It was a youthful indiscretion.
Right.
And they're an adult. And so I don't know how I guess it's just repetition and correcting people and making sure that the correct language is used.
Well, it's a subliminal message. It's a subliminal way to tell you who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. And the good guy just always happens to be the one that has means and the one that has always looked good in the movies and so in our case, in our city, again, in Ohio, I mean, when this happened, I called a press conference and all the news and the media came, and the press conference was to talk about them while they're in the room. and then they aired it. So that was weird. But that is, how, it's like when you get old enough, you're like, I'm tired of it. I'm not going to go along with the lies. I'm not going to do it. So let's just call it out right now, how it is. And now in my city, people do not print those things. They do not say those things on the news, because if they do, then they know there's going to be a press conference. They know there's going to be some repercussions. So we are not going to continue these lies about people. And to me, that's the way, but you have to be in a protected position sometimes to do those things. And so, I think anybody in my kind of protected position could speak out to those things, because they do subliminally, this young man, or if they want to, hold a young Black boy over to adult court, watch the news. They'll start referring to him as young man. They'll start talking about his past in a negative light. They're preparing the community to go along with their plan. And so disrupting and dismantling that through language is very powerful and very important.
Now, earlier, Dr. Williamson, you talked about kind of that common bond with the vulnerability, and it's hard. I know people, watching might be tired of this. I know I am tired of this, but it's hard to look at the world and not view it through a post-pandemic lens. And so I'm wondering, in the past year or so, have you seen any difference or any uptick, I guess, in this, issue because of the restrictions and people can't move freely and things of that nature?
Absolutely. And not only is it my opinion, but somebody did a study. So statistically, those places around the country in the 1850s or around that time period that fought the hardest against freeing the slaves, when you overlay the uptick in human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, you can almost lay it over those same communities across the United States. So when people say, well, why are you still talking about the history of slavery? Like, why are you still talking about that? We moved on from that. No. Just like in certain cultures, history and belief systems are passed on verbally generation to generation to generation. That is still live and very much alive in these communities across the US. And there is a certain underlying belief that there should be this segment of people who are less valuable that can serve men's pleasures. And so those are the throwaway children and teens that aren't as valuable. So, now we are like Black Lives Matter. And when we first started saying Black Lives Matter, everybody was offended. It's like, oh my God, we're just saying matters. Like, that's offensive? Okay, so, but prior to that, we were saying all children's lives matter. And people were saying, well, yes, of course, all children's lives matter. And it's like, but they don't, though. There are some children who are reserved for abuse and exploitation, and then blamed for that very abuse and exploitation, and arrested. And still today, I don't understand. Women in street prostitution are arrested. That makes no sense to me. Everybody knows all the social problems, the mental health, that social services should be caring for women with social problems. And least of all, not police officers who are dominated by males who have direct power over vulnerable women. That is a recipe for disaster. And we know what is happening on the street, but who do the women who are oppressed report their oppression to? Like their oppressor? So that is, for instance, in my city a few years ago, we convicted 3 pastors for sex trafficking. Because anywhere that you give someone absolute power and discretion to use that power how they want to wield it, then you are going to have corruption. And that power goes unchecked. You know, when you have pastors, when you have CEOs, when you have politicians, when you have police officers on the street, they have power. And when you mix them with people who are vulnerable,
right,
then abuse of power is highly likely. And we keep pretending that doesn't happen. But people in that church didn't speak up because they have been socialized to give over their voice and their power. Things like that happen in all kinds of sectors across the US. And now, because of the Me Too movement, people are now speaking out. But, you know, how many women did it take to come forward before Bill Cosby, before it was even going to be taken seriously? How many women's voices does it take to be valid? You know what I'm saying? So we still have a long way to go.
I just want to take a step back, and if you can talk about your research, and also I believe you have written a book and more on that will enlighten.
Yeah. Well, I started doing research around 1998, formal research. But in 1993, when I went out for 6 months, and I didn't realize I was collecting data. I didn't realize I was doing an anthropological qualitative study. Now I look back, that's exactly what I was doing. So I had gotten at one point in my career, 10 years of federal funding from the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Justice to formally study this issue, sex trafficking and or street prostitution, and have published a lot of articles on the topic, and have done all the things, you know, gotten through associate professor, full professor to distinguished professor. I mean, that is like 1% of the university professors in the land get to be distinguished professor, and I am one. So I've done all the things and gotten all the grants and published all the peer-reviewed articles and started a journal and all the things. And it just I come back to the work that I do, which is to translate that research to practitioners who are working directly with survivors. I have a course where I teach people how to work with survivors, direct service practitioners. I teach that course outside the university. I have a course on a prevention curriculum for high-risk girls, so that we can change the trajectory of their lives before they're trafficked. And I have my research on how to move victims to survivors and survivors to thrivers so that they can recover. And all of those things are outside the university because everybody doesn't want to go to a university. They don't want to pay all this money. They don't want to sit through all these irrelevant classes. They just want, give me the information so that I can be effective today. Like we're out of time.
Right.
So, so I do that. Yeah.
Speaking of, I like what you said there, where we go from victims to survivors to thrivers. Can you talk a little bit about that process and maybe some of the, like, you know, you mentioned mental health earlier, and I'm imagining that like that's a journey, like it just doesn't happen overnight. And do you have instances where unfortunately somebody goes back to that life?
Absolutely, all the time. Matter of fact, that is the common trajectory of recovery. You're going to attend, there's 10 areas that you're going to attend to as a direct service provider helping a victim. But some of those areas are substance abuse because you've used drugs now to cope with all the rapes and all the trauma. Mental health, you've suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, because you did not know from day to day what your life would look like because it's been controlled by somebody else. You're going to need housing, food, clothing, shelter. Right. Safety is going to be the thing that threads through all of the work that you do. So in recovery, boundaries are very important. Teaching and reclaiming your boundaries, reclaiming your freedom, empowerment, autonomy, agency, safety, trust. Trust has been critically broken, and trust never really exactly comes fully back, but you trust people who are trustworthy, which is a better place to be actually. So all of these things require a lot of hard work, internal work for that survivor to become a thriver. And then externally, we need to be providing housing, food, clothing, shelter, legal services, mental health services, trauma treatment services, substance abuse services. So it is a holistic, comprehensive process that they have to go through for recovery. It's hard, it's expensive, and relapse is high, and relapse is common. And so, you go back and then you come back in, you go back and you come back in. What we do is save the bed, because we know hopefully you'll be back, because you have to go back out, you come back, you go back, because you're building trust, because you don't trust, because the people in these organizations helping you represent the very people that bought you. It's not the guy that lives under the bridge that bought you because he didn't have any money. It is the people you see in everyday: police officers, lawyers, social workers, pastors, these are the people that purchased you. So how do I then come back and trust people that represent those very people? And so it takes a lot of time, and survivors do what is logical given the resources that they have. Like if you were dropped in their situation, you would make the same decisions for your own safety that they make.
And how about like foreign labor and sex trafficking on?
Yeah, well, in foreign folks that come here into the US are often duped into thinking that they're going to be working as a nanny, or they're going to be working in a restaurant or whatever. And they might be brought here and put into a massage parlor, into a brothel, working 6-7 days, or they might be put into an ethnic restaurant, but they will work that restaurant 6 or 7 days a week. They have a bond, call it debt bondage, where you have to pay back your traffickers for all your travel expenses, all the things, whatever they make up, whatever they decide, you have to pay that back. And so you're working, and maybe they hand you $50 at the end of the week. And then they say, well, we're going to take 30 of it for your current room and board. We're going to send 10 back to your family, because they want your family to believe that you are working a legitimate job or whatever, helping out the family. And then we're going to put $10 on your debt of $10,000. It's designed for you never to be able to pay that back. And they entrap you into a system. And by the way, they don't just traffic you for your labor or for sex. Like they're also trying to use whatever legalities you have in the US to open a credit card, to purchase a home, to get a loan, to do what they are, taking every aspect of your life and trying to capitalize on it, having you commit crime, stealing so that they can sell the items and make money. They are ruining your credit, your career, giving you a criminal record, whatever they can to get money from you until they've used you up. And so in the US, under US law, if you are a labor trafficking victim or sex trafficking victim from another country, then you will not be deported. Of course, that's easier said than done. I mean, that's what the law says, but you have to be a good advocate. But you will not be deported. You'll get legal services, social services, housing, mental health, substance abuse treatment, all the things you need to recover. And if your family members are at risk in your country of origin, they can be brought over to the US as well.
One of the things that I've found kind of interesting, Doctor, about the last year is how, like, I've got friends all over the political spectrum. And I've noticed, they're all kind of around my age range, 30 to 45. And the most conservative of them has gotten a little bit more socialist over the past year, because we realized the system's broken and the system works as it was designed to. And so when you're talking about, mental health, or, some of these services that are needed for victims and survivors to get them to that next level, how much responsibility do we have, and does the government have, in making this possible?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot happening on that front. I think that the fact, first of all, when the US government talks about prevention, partnership, or prevention, prosecution, and protection, and that comes from the UN, and that was our 3 Ps, protection, prosecution, and prevention. We got to all go out and do that. And now 20 years later, we realize, well, a few of us realize that we also need partnership, because we all thought we were going to do it on our own. You can't, you have to collaborate. And we brought power and privilege into our movement. We brought racism and sexism and homophobia. We brought all that in there. So we, the government, and we, the people in our anti-trafficking coalitions across the US, have to realize that we're coming at it from our very middle class perspective. We think, just arrest him and put him in prison for life. And of course, who we're arresting are, brown and black peoples for the most part. And who the customers are have been largely white men who have been used as witnesses against traffickers. So they're given a lot of immunity or reduced sentencing. So again, we're bringing in the racism and the sexism and everything we're known for into this movement. And by the way, we want our victim to look a certain way and present a certain way, the way we read about on CNN or whatever. But CNN did that story because it was sensationalized. It wasn't the norm. So we're looking for that little vulnerable girl, not boy, who presents and is humble and is happy to be rescued. And that's what we're all kind of looking for. And that's really not, our victims present very harshly because they had to survive. So that's really not what, and by the way, when we look at gang members who are forced in, because under the trafficking law, trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. So anything that happened where you were forced, fraud, or coercion, or you're under 18. So when we look at gang members who are forced into the gang and then forced to sell drugs and then give the money to the gang leaders, that is the definition of labor trafficking. But they're not going to be treated like victims of a crime, they best believe. So because they don't look the part, they don't act the part, they're very much afraid, and they have all of the symptoms and elements of under the law, but we're just not going to look because they don't present as a credible victim.
I have a question here. Like, I'm a victim, right? So that's why I wear this mask, and I come to you, right? And I realize that from what you are saying, that like most of the people don't even know that like they are victim and they are doing this, right? In terms of sex, or I don't even look at it as, why do we like even discriminate that, like, or divide it into sex and labor? Both sex and labor are, even at least in sex, you get the pleasure. In labor, like you don't even get that, right? They don't get paid. So both are labor. So whatever that is, like as a human trafficking, right? So I am trafficking. I know that I'm a victim. If I come to you and say like I'm a victim, you just say that like you sympathize or show empathy. After that, what? How do I become a survivor and how do I thrive?
Yeah. So some of the people are like you, they will say, it's all really labor trafficking because everybody, the victims are putting in a tremendous amount of labor. And so that is true. And the sex trafficking victims, I mean, the sex is probably enjoyed by the customer, hated by the victim, of course. But once somebody is identified as a victim, then we do a complete assessment. And what we do is we look over those 10 areas, some of which I talked about. So we'll assess, we'll link that person to the FBI, to the state task force, if they want to pursue prosecution. If they don't, because some people do not, then they'll be referred to some social service type entity who will do an assessment. So we like to look over trauma, substance abuse, mental health. And so these are all your needs, your housing needs, your clothing, your needs, your educational needs, all these things. And when you say, yes, I need this, yes, I want that, yes, I want that, no, I don't want that, no, I don't want that, then that social service professional goes along with what the survivor said they want in their life. And that's very, very important, because empowerment, giving you your power back, reclaiming your life based on what you want to do, is critically important. So when that person says, yes, I think I have a substance abuse issue, I would like treatment. Yes, I want to talk to an attorney, not about my trafficking, but maybe about another case. I want to be represented, or I need housing. Yes, I need. And so that person, the social worker, case manager, care coordinator, wraps around that person all the services that the person said that they want to recover. Now, once they get down that line, we like to encourage all survivors to get trauma treatment, because their experiences have been traumatizing, and we know that trauma can affect every part of your life, from your ability to get a job and hold the job, to have friends, to have relationships that are healthy. Trauma affects everything. So having trauma treatment counseling is important. Once you get down that road, then the typical person usually closes the case. But we believe that you have to go from survivor to thriver, not just surviving, but thriving. So now when you get to that point in your recovery, what is it that your dreams, your wishes, your hopes were for yourself and your family, and how can we make that possible? So then we go to work in that area. And so at the university, we have scholarships called free scholarships, where we prepare survivors who are ready to go through our 6-week course to learn how to go back to school, to be successful and all the things. And those are taught by survivors. And then we give them a scholarship, tutoring, mentoring, so that they can be successful, not in a degree. I mean, some people want a degree, some people just want a certification, whatever it is that they want. Again, it's got to be what they want to empower them. Then we try to support them to do that. And so that's the whole continuum of what we try to do and what we think people should try to do.
Dr. Williamson, I wanted to circle back to when you talked about these young boys that were victims, because I do think, when people think of sex trafficking survivors, they often think of women, and a lot of times because of the news, they think of, little blonde white girl. And in actuality, it's a lot more black and brown girls. But is there something different when it comes to these boys? Is there a different tact, or are there any kind of I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Any different tactics that you have to take, to help them along that transition? Yeah,
and you're right. That's who they think of, and a lot of times it's because of the pictures and the way we've marketed and advertised it. With the little girl with the chains around her wrists and the tape across her mouth and those kind of crazy things. But it is happening disproportionately to Black and brown populations, but also white populations that have been runaways and been involved in child protection and things like that, and who are at high risk. Boys are also trafficked, and disproportionately gay boys. Although straight boys can also be trafficked, disproportionately gay boys and who are at really high risk, because a lot of times they might not have a stable support system. They might not have a family background that is supportive of who they really are. And so when they run away, they're 2.5 times more likely than anybody else to be trafficked into the sex trade. And they're sold a message of, this is our lifestyle. Like younger boys always go home and stay with older men and trade sex for a place to stay. That's a part of our lifestyle. That is not a part of the gay lifestyle. That is exploitation. That is trafficking. And so getting that message out to LGBTQ communities is very important. That's one of the things that we like to do in our community through our coalition, because boys are so at risk, and because they're told the message that, this is okay, this is a part of just what you have to do. And then, discrimination plays a part, because we talk about trans population, they're at high risk as well, because in some places across the US, there's 75% unemployment rate for trans individuals. And so people that are needing to get surgeries and things like that, that is one of the ways that they have figured out to pay for it, is through the underground market like this. So, yeah.
One quick question on that. Is it visible in academics, right? In colleges, universities, schools, like you're talking about the sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Have you ever seen anything like that in the academic community?
Yeah, we have students now that come forward, and I've just worked with, interviewed several students as I'm kind of refining this group project. I want to teach people how to run groups to move victims to survivors to thrivers. But so I just talked to a couple of survivors with master's degrees, one of which actually understood her trafficking experience because of a lecture at a university where somebody was lecturing about trafficking, and she was like, oh my God, I think that's my experience. We have several university students across the US who deem themselves sugar babies, and they're looking for sugar daddies, and there are websites devoted to this, and they will trade pictures, meet up, have sex with this one person in exchange for just his money, which I'm not going to judge what adults do. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in people who are being exploited. The thing, and how you define exploitation, I guess, is relative. The worry that I have is that you may not be meeting up with a sugar daddy. You may in fact be meeting up with the trafficker, who is now, you are going to be making money, but it's not going to be for school and books. It's going to be to put in his pocket, because you have just entered into a game you know nothing about. And so he knows all about the game, because the game is sold, never told. And so you are about to he's about to hit a lick, and you are about to be his next wife-in-law in his stable of women. Now, and we've had that at my university as well. And there are a few universities across the US who are attending to this issue. Like, I have an institute at the University of Toledo, but there's also one at Arizona State University, University of Michigan, Kansas. So there's a few universities that are focusing in on it as well.
Really quick, Doc, just what you were talking about, where, I guess the sugar baby, sugar daddies thing, and it just got me to thinking, how has technology, over the past 10 years, because even in the last 10 years, we've seen that rapid acceleration of how people can connect. How has technology affected the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking?
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's exploded as it has in any other business, because, human trafficking is a business, and the victims are supply and the customers are demand, and it operates under the same principles as an underground market. And so technology is most definitely being used. I mean, one of the things is using houses, having people, loan their house for the weekend, and then you text everybody and you let everybody know, hey, we're going to be selling sex at this location, so that the target keeps changing, so that it's harder to investigate. Traffickers meet young people, vulnerable people online all the time, because young people will express their vulnerabilities online. And so they don't say, I am in need of love. They don't say that, because that would be uncool and ridiculous, but they say things like, look at my selfie. They make comments in the language that they speak, but best believe the underlying message is, I would love someone who cares about me. I would love to be treated as an adult. I would love to be admired. And I want people to think I'm beautiful. And those are all the human emotion, and those are all the human condition that everybody wants. But when you're vulnerable, then somebody steps online and they say, hey, baby girl, you got it all. And you're sitting on a gold. Yeah, that's right. You're sitting on a gold mine. And let me tell you, together we can make, and so they're feeding into your vulnerabilities. And that's what they do. That's what they're masters at doing. It's not about snatching and grabbing, because there's no glory in the underground market. There is no glory in snatching and grabbing. Like any dope off the street can do that. The master manipulator, the people that can take over a woman's mind or a kid's heart or something like that is revered. Even if you go to prison, if you go to prison and you sexually molested children, you have little to no value in a prison. But if you've done the same thing, but you put a price on that child's head, now you are revered. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, but the manipulation is what is critical. And that's what, Ice-T, who used to be a pimp, said it's like teaching astrophysics to a third grader. It is a skill that you have to learn. And so that's why it's revered, I think, in the underground market still.
Well, you have certainly made a lot of sense. I was just going to say, Shiva, JK, before we let Dr. Williamson go, any other last questions?
Number one country is US, like making a porn video and porn movies. And what do you think about they on the porn video or movie actor? They're saying like they think like they are actor and they're earning. Is it a sex trafficking, or what US government are doing about the number one country who making movie on porn videos and movie making or website? A lot of website is there only from the US. What do you think about?
Yeah, I think that pornography is tricky, because we have such a strong sex worker rights movement as well in this country. And that's why I choose my words carefully. Like I say, I focus on those who are exploited, forced fraud, coercion, kids. That's where my focus is, because I think there's a large segment in the country that are sex workers, and they fight for their rights to be sex workers. And I'm not one to go tell any adult woman what she should or should not be doing with her body. That is like the first violation in the feminist handbook. So I don't do that. So pornography is tricky in the sense that, some actors are there because that is what they chose to do. Some people are there because they say they chose it, but it's hard to choose when you're in poverty, addicted to drugs, or have past childhood abuse and traumas. And sometimes you are positioned and then extorted. People will take your pictures and they'll post them on Pornhub. And that's the conversation going on currently in the country, is kids who they don't know. And so they're sending their boyfriend pictures that are, meant for their boyfriend only. And those pictures get intercepted and they get put on these websites. And then once that happens, so far it has been very, very difficult for that young person to get their pictures back. And they aren't realizing that this could happen. And they're not realizing that when they get older, they want to have professional jobs, and they want to be, and those pictures are out there always as a threat, that somebody's going to find them. And so that's something that federal legislators are listening to on Capitol Hill now, getting testimony around that, trying to figure out what to do about that.
Thank you, Dr. Celia. It's wonderful to talk to you, and it's a pleasure. We can go on and on because we want to be mindful of your time. And my final question before we end this. So why did you choose this? Like, have you ever experienced this kind of question from your family, friends, and what made you to be the advocate of human trafficking, particularly on the sex trafficking? Because many people will say, like, if you don't experience, you yourself are not a victim and a survivor, most survivors do this. And did anyone ask you this question? Have you been abused or have you been a victim?
Yeah, I get that question a lot because you're right. A lot of people who have experienced this then get that passion that lasts them a lifetime to fight against it. I have not been a trafficking victim. I had 3 friends that were trafficked. One was murdered, one was addicted her whole life until she died, and the other one escaped. I have been the victim of domestic violence, been the victim of poverty and stigma because of that poverty. And so I think that women's experiences are common in terms of the underlying experiences of disrespect. And so if that has sort of lit the passion in me that has lasted for 26 years, and I'm still I'm still excited even to get up every day and work on this issue, because the more I really truly believe that your oppression and your freedom is really intricately tied to my oppression and my freedom. And so it's a very selfish endeavor in that I work for other people's freedom because I know it comes back to me and that I get more freedom if you're more free. And so it's a very selfish thing that I do. Even though it appears not, it is totally selfish because I want to live free as a woman of color living in the United States. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thought. Thank you.
Yes, it's wonderful. Thank you.
Before we let you go, Dr. Williamson, for anybody out there that wants to learn more about this issue or become more active in their own communities, what are some resources that you could direct them to?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a podcast called Emancipation Nation podcast. It comes out.
Great title.
Yes. You see where I'm getting to? Trying to be free. But so I have an Emancipation Nation podcast. I have a book called Seat at the Table. I'm sorry you mentioned that before. I forgot to mention it because I'm a terrible saleswoman, but you can pick up my book and read all about me if you're interested in that. But other than that, my website is celiawilliamson.com, and my courses are listed there in case you want to take courses. But you can listen to the podcast and learn a lot more about human trafficking and how you can be a great and effective advocate.
Very, very good. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Celia Williamson joined us this week. We'll definitely have to have you back, particularly when Melissa is available to be on the show, because I think you two would have a great conversation about this.
Okay, awesome. And thank you for the opportunity. I much appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise. Stop, listen, share. Everyone can make a difference. We are on a mission. Everyone should do something greater in their lifetime. Change the future. Be a proud member. Join us to support, volunteer, and donate.